You know, um, you know that feeling when you're trying to figure out the absolute best way to
Hmm.
finally get in tune with your physical self?
Oh, yeah, like constantly.
Right. Like you
Yeah.
look at all the options out there, and honestly, it can feel less like adopting a health practice and more like shopping for a new personality.
Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like.
You sort of feel like you have to choose. Like, is your path going to be 90 minutes of just agonizing hot yoga?
Yeah.
Or, is it sitting perfectly still on a meditation cushion until your knees literally scream?
Or maybe some ancient martial art where you're just moving in this agonizing slow motion.
Exactly. And we treat body awareness as this destination. And we just assume the vehicle getting us there has to be, well, some perfectly optimized physical technique.
I mean, we constantly see this exhausting search for the ultimate physical method. The underlying assumption is always that if you can just, contort your body into the precise right shape
Right.
or hold your breath in the exact right rhythm, then you'll magically unlock this hidden door to profound physical awareness.
Like a cheat code.
Yeah, like a cheat code. The focus is entirely mechanical. We look at the body as a puzzle that basically has to be solved through physical exertion or, rigid posture.
And as someone listening to this right now, someone who loves to learn and honestly just loves to optimize their time and energy, you've probably weighed these options yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
You want the most effective route to understanding your own physiology.
Hmm.
But today, we are doing a deep dive into a paper titled A Structural Perspective on the Conditions Required for Subtle Body Awareness.
It is such a fascinating piece of research.
It really is.
Yeah,
And it completely upends that entire mechanical approach we were just talking about.
completely.
The core premise we're exploring today is it's somewhat radical. The authors argue that the best physical technique actually doesn't exist.
Right.
The critical factor for true body awareness is not what your joints and muscles are doing at all. It's actually the cognitive architecture of your mind while you attempt the observation.
Yeah, and the title of the paper itself gives us a major clue here. When the authors talk about a structural perspective, they are not talking about, like, the anatomical structure of your skeleton.
Oh, that's a great point to clarify.
Yeah, they're talking about the organizational structure of your perception. It's a fundamental shift. It's moving away from asking what physical movement produces awareness
Yeah.
to asking how does the mind need to be organized to even receive subtle physical data.
Wow, okay.
So this paper basically frames body awareness not as a physical achievement, but as an issue of cognitive bandwidth.
Okay, so if we look at this as a bandwidth issue,
Hmm.
I think let's break down the mechanics of the systems we're actually trying to access here.
Sure.
Because when we talk about subtle body awareness, we're generally dealing with, well, proprioception, which is our awareness of where our body is in space, and interoception.
Right, the internal sensing.
Exactly, the internal sensing of things like your heartbeat, your digestion, subtle muscular tension. So if those internal signals are constantly broadcasting, what's the mechanism that actually prevents us from just, feeling them?
Well, the paper frames this as a pretty severe signal-to-noise problem.
Okay.
To understand the mechanism, we have to look at the relative strength of the signals competing for our brain's attention, right? The deep body sensations you just mentioned, the interoceptive and subtle proprioceptive data, they are extraordinarily faint.
Like biologically faint.
Yeah, exactly. These are really low amplitude signals traveling along neural pathways that essentially evolved to operate quietly in the background, but they're constantly being masked by cognitive processes that demand, well, massive amounts of neurological energy.
Man, it really feels like trying to tune into a tiny, low-wattage AM radio station broadcasting from, like, 3 towns over.
That is a great way to put it.
But you're attempting to hear it while standing next to a stadium-sized stereo system, blasting heavy metal right next to your head.
Yes, perfect analogy.
Like, the radio station is transmitting perfectly fine. The signal is there. But the sheer volume of the local noise just makes it totally impossible to detect.
Exactly.
So what exactly makes up that stadium stereo in our day-to-day lives?
Yeah.
Like, what is the noise? The text outlines specific cognitive processes that create this interference, right?
Yeah, it identifies this ongoing stream of highly dominant mental activities. So the noise consists of our active thoughts, our fluctuating emotions, our baseline moods.
Basically everything we experience in a given day.
Pretty much. It also includes our expectations. which is a big one, like what we assume we should be feeling during a specific exercise.
Oh, wow.
And perhaps the loudest components are our autobiographical memories and our self-image.
The self-image, that's so interesting.
Yeah. When you consider the sheer neural real estate required to maintain a complex self-image, or even just to process anxiety about an upcoming meeting you have later that day, it completely dwarfs the tiny electrical impulse of, say, a subtle shift in fascial tension.
So the limiting factor really is just the signal-to-noise ratio within your perception.
Exactly.
This brings up a really fascinating trap that the paper highlights regarding interpretation. Because if the mind's narrative is so dominant, it seems incredibly easy to confuse thinking about the body with actually feeling the body.
Oh, this happens all the time.
Like, I can imagine someone sitting in a stretch, right, feeling a tight hamstring, and genuinely believing that they are highly aware of it. But structurally, their attention is doing something entirely different.
This is a profound distinction in the source material. I mean, most of the time, when a person attempts to observe their bodily sensations, their attention almost instantly shifts away from the raw sensory data.
Where does it go?
It latches onto their cognition about the body. We unknowingly reinforce existing mental narratives instead of just processing the direct physical sensations.
Because it's easier.
Yeah, because the direct sensation is weak, so the brain prefers to deal with the higher order cognitive concept. It's familiar, it's robust.
Okay, let's play out the mechanics of that, because I want to make sure I really grasp this.
Sure.
Let's say I feel a slight tension in my shoulder.
Okay.
Instead of resting my attention on the raw data of, the heat, the pressure, or vibration in that specific muscle tissue, my brain immediately kicks in to top-down processing.
Exactly.
I launch this whole mental narrative like, ugh, my shoulder's tight because I carry all my stress there. I really need to get a massage. I have such awful posture.
Yes. And at that exact moment, you are not feeling the physical reality of the shoulder anymore.
I'm just listening to a monologue.
You're listening to a monologue about your self-image as a stressed person.
Wow.
And by engaging in that monologue, the object of your observation has shifted completely. You've abandoned the subtle AM radio station, and you just turned the stadium stereo all the way up.
Man.
The paper actually emphasizes that this habit of interpretation actively degrades our capacity for direct observation.
Really? It degrades it.
Yeah. The brain is so efficient at categorizing and diagnosing that it basically just bypasses the actual sensation. You end up observing your own psychological patterns regarding your body, but you're mistaking them for physical awareness.
Okay, I actually want to push back on this framework a little bit.
Sure, go for it.
Specifically for the type of listener who, approaches their physical health with a lot of drive and intensity.
The type A personalities.
Exactly, the type A listener. Because we're talking about signals being too quiet to hear over the mind. The logical type A solution to a quiet signal is simply to amplify it, right?
Right.
If I go to a highly rigorous, demanding power yoga class or do some brutal martial arts sparring session, my heart is pounding, my muscles are screaming, and I am hyper aware of my physical limits.
You're definitely feeling your body then.
Right. And if I nail a complicated movement, I feel incredibly locked into my physiology. So isn't creating a louder physical signal a completely valid way to overcome the cognitive noise?
It is a very natural assumption, especially in our current fitness culture. I mean, it makes logical sense, but the text explicitly dismantles that approach.
It does. How so?
Well, the paper does not dismiss movement, to be clear. Vigorous training alters posture, it shifts tension, it reorganizes the body in highly beneficial ways.
Yeah.
However, the text makes a really vital distinction here. Large, intense movements are a means to reorganize the body. They are not the end goal of awareness.
Okay, I see.
When you rely entirely on intense stimulation, like the burning muscle or the pounding heart, you are basically only training your brain to notice massive physiological alarms.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you are not developing sensitivity.
Oh, so we're basically confusing gross motor sensation with subtle body awareness.
Exactly. And there's a huge psychological trap in that intense practice, too.
Which is?
Well, think about your focus during that power yoga class. If it's entirely consumed by the pleasure of a deep stretch, or the achievement of finally nailing a handstand, or even just the sheer excitement of surviving a tough workout.
I'm generating massive amounts of emotional data.
Yes. You are generating massive amounts of emotional and ego-driven data, which brings us directly to the paradox of the perfect practice.
Wait, unpack that for me. The paradox.
Yeah, so if your attention is locked onto the achievement or the pride of executing a method correctly, you have literally just introduced entirely new, incredibly loud forms of cognitive noise.
Because excitement is still noise.
Exactly. Excitement, judgment, frustration, the desire to succeed, these are all complex cognitive processes.
So if I go in wanting to win at yoga,
If you enter a practice designed for awareness, but you treat it as a performance to be conquered, those subtle signals remain entirely masked. The framework in the paper argues that the ultimate objective is never stronger physical stimulation.
it's greater perceptual sensitivity.
You nailed it. You cannot shout down the cognitive noise with physical exertion.
So we don't need the physical body to scream louder. We just need the mind to stop shouting over it.
Right.
And that transition moving from a loud mind to a receptive one is where the text introduces the target state. And I just have to say, the early terminology the paper mentions for this state is kind of intense.
Oh, yeah, it really is.
They note it used to be informally referred to as brain cancellation.
Brain cancellation, yeah.
I mean, that terminology sounds like you were hooking yourself up to a terminal to wipe your hard drive, or trying to achieve some kind of absolute sci-fi void in your head.
Well, the author does note that brain cancellation is a highly dramatic and often misunderstood term, which is exactly why the paper adopts a much more precise term for a wider audience, which is quiet cognition.
Quiet cognition. That sounds a lot friendlier.
It does, but it is crucial to define what this state actually entails, because the concept of a quiet mind is so loaded with cultural baggage.
It really is.
The text is very deliberate in clarifying what quiet cognition is not. It does not imply a mystical awakening. It's not a clinical, altered state of consciousness. And it absolutely does not require the complete cessation of thought.
Okay, well, that is a massive relief. Because, honestly, the idea of sitting on a mat trying to force zero thoughts into my head usually just results in me thinking very, very loudly about how bad I am at having zero thoughts.
Right. Everyone does that.
So if we aren't wiping the hard drive and just deleting all mental activity, what is the actual mechanism of quiet cognition? Like, how does the brain actually function in this state?
Well, in a state of quiet cognition, your general perception functions completely normally.
Okay.
You still process visual and auditory information, thoughts arise, and emotions still occur. You remain fully awake and completely grounded in reality.
So it changes.
The structural shift happens in the volume and the dominance of the self.
Self.
Yeah, the habitual self-referential processing, the emotional identification with your thoughts, that constant autobiographical narrative we talked about, they simply exert much less gravitational pull on your attention.
So the thoughts are present, but they lose their authority.
Exactly. They are no longer the CEO directing all the brain's resources. They're just background processes running quietly without, interrupting the main system.
And if the self-referential narrative isn't hijacking our attention every few seconds, that bandwidth is suddenly freed up.
That's the bandwidth shift.
And that is when those faint, interoceptive and proprioceptive signals, like the subtle realities of our breath, our tension, our digestion, can actually be processed by our conscious awareness.
Yeah. And the author grounds this in phenomenological observation, meaning they're describing the first-person lived experience of the state. Phenomenologically, quiet cognition feels less like achieving something and more like, dropping something.
Dropping the noise.
Right. The automatic interpretation of sensations becomes significantly muted. Because the cognitive interference is reduced, the subtle sensory data just organically rises to the surface of your awareness without you having to force yourself to feel it.
See, understanding that mechanism, I think it completely changes how we should evaluate our own practice time.
Oh, totally.
Because the immediate instinct for someone driven to improve, like a listener who wants to optimize all this, is to take the concept of quiet cognition and immediately attempt to marathon it.
Naturally.
Right. Like if a quiet mind is the goal, the logical next step is to force oneself into a rigid practice for, 4 hours a day to maximize the benefit.
Yeah.
But the source text strongly challenges this more is better approach to duration, doesn't it?
It really does. Because many traditional practices do emphasize spending long, grueling periods, meditating or holding challenging postures. However, the paper argues that duration alone is not the catalyst for profound change.
Wait, really? Duration alone doesn't do it?
No. The critical metric is not the quantity of time spent in a posture, but the quality of the cognitive state that you maintain during that time. Sitting still for 3 hours holds literally no intrinsic value if your internal environment is chaotic the entire time.
Oh, it's the neuroplasticity equivalent of trying to learn an instrument through sheer repetition without ever checking your form.
It's
Like, if I sit down and practice a complex guitar chord incorrectly for 100 hours, I do not become a master guitarist.
No, you don't.
I just become incredibly efficient at playing the chord wrong. I've carved a deep neural groove for the wrong movement.
That is a perfect parallel. If someone sits in seated meditation for hours, but their attention is entirely consumed by frustration or evaluating their progress or reviewing an argument they had yesterday, they are not developing subtle body awareness.
What are they doing then?
They are actively practicing their cognitive noise.
Wow.
They are reinforcing the very mental processes that mask the subtle sensation in the first place. The text explains that the goal of spending time in quiet cognition is not merely to experience like a brief respite from your thoughts. The objective is to facilitate a baseline shift.
A baseline shift, okay.
Yeah, quiet cognition should not be viewed as a temporary superpower that you activate on a yoga mat and then just switch off when you leave the studio.
The concept of a baseline shift is really where this becomes highly applicable to daily life. We're not trying to artificially induce a strange state of mind. We are trying to recalibrate our default mode entirely.
Exactly.
By spending high-quality, unstructured time in a state where the self-referential narrative is dialed down, we're essentially training the brain to adopt that lower noise state as its new normal.
Right.
The cognitive condition you inhabit during your practice eventually dictates the organizational structure of your perception throughout your entire day.
And this brings a massive element of personalization to the forefront, because if duration is not the primary factor, and the specific physical method, whether it's yoga or martial arts, doesn't inherently guarantee success, we have to look at how an individual actually achieves this baseline shift.
Right. Like, how do we actually do this?
This is where the paper dismantles the guilt that so many people feel when popular methods fail them. People frequently assume that if they cannot succeed at, say, seated mindfulness, they just lack discipline, or they're simply untalented at body awareness.
I know so many people who carry that exact frustration. They try the standard advice, sit quietly, watch your breath, and their mind absolutely rebels.
Yes.
The stadium stereo doesn't just stay loud, it seems to get louder in the silence.
It really does.
They end up feeling like they totally failed at mindfulness, when in reality they just chose a tool that is highly incompatible with their specific nervous system. The text introduces an incredibly freeing concept here, right? Achieving this state might rely heavily on finding your specific entry point.
Yeah, the paper introduces a high degree of individual variance. Finding the right entry point is not a matter of sheer willpower. It's about discovering the specific activity that happens to quiet your unique brand of cognitive noise.
So it's different for everyone.
Totally. For one individual, the stillness of seated meditation might naturally dampen their internal narrative. It works for them. But for someone with a different cognitive profile, forced stillness might induce massive anxiety, which effectively amplifies their noise.
So for that second person, their entry point into quiet cognition might be, I don't know, walking through a forest.
Exactly. Or it might be the rhythmic movement of swimming. The text explicitly lists disciplines like martial arts, yoga, breathing exercises, stretching, and dance as entirely equal possibilities on a structural level.
None is inherently superior.
None.
Yeah.
The paper even goes so far as to admit that finding your specific method involves a considerable degree of personal exploration and, crucially, a degree of chance.
Really? Chance.
Yeah, it requires trial and error. You cannot know in advance which activity will finally unhook your attention from your self-image. The value of a method should be judged purely by its empirical result for you as an individual.
Right. Does it work for you?
Basically, does it create a stable condition where your internal narrative fades, allowing direct observation of the body?
So we basically have to completely stop judging these practices by their aesthetics or their history.
Excellent.
It does not matter how ancient a lineage is, how complex the philosophy behind it might be, or, frankly, how many optimized CEOs swear by it in their morning routines.
Right.
If a highly touted silent retreat triggers a massive loop of self-evaluation for you, it is the wrong tool.
Exactly.
But if dancing aggressively in your living room allows your mind to finally stop narrating your life, then for your nervous system, dancing is the structurally superior method for subtle body awareness.
That's the core takeaway. We must categorize all physical practices, all the posture work, the breath control, the movement drills strictly as instruments.
They're just tools.
They are just scaffolding used to create the specific conditions where your subtle bodily signals actually become accessible. The mechanism of transformation lies entirely within the quality of your attention and the cognitive state you achieve, not the biomechanics of the movement itself.
I love that. So let's kind of synthesize the journey we've taken through this paper. True body awareness is fundamentally not about hunting down a universally superior physical technique.
Right.
The holy grail of
Yeah.
getting in tune with your body does not exist in a specific posture, an elite training facility, or, a secret breathing pattern.
It doesn't. It requires an honest audit of your own cognitive noise. It demands that you basically give yourself the permission to discard tools that create mental friction and instead explore different modalities until you find the one that naturally lowers the volume of your internal narrative.
Which gives you access.
Exactly. It's about accessing quiet cognition, where your perception is clear, your thoughts are present but no longer dominant, and the subtle data of your physical reality is finally allowed to register.
And by accessing that state with quality and consistency, you actually engineer a baseline shift. You change your default mode of operating in the world, allowing all that rich interoceptive and proprioceptive information to just be a seamless part of your daily awareness. What I appreciate so deeply about the author's approach here is their intellectual honesty. They conclude by noting that this structural perspective is a theoretical framework built on phenomenological observation, analyzing the subjective lived experience of these practices from the inside out.
Right.
They offer it as a foundation, pointing out that we definitely need further empirical scientific study to map exactly how these cognitive shifts alter our neural pathways.
But as a starting point, it is just profoundly useful.
Yeah.
Because it strips the dogma out of physical mindfulness entirely. It removes the hierarchy of practices.
Oh, absolutely.
It empowers the individual to become an active researcher of their own nervous system, trusting their direct experience of what quiets their mind over external pressure to just conform to some standardized method.
Which leaves us with a genuinely provocative thought to carry forward from this deep dive.
I'm ready.
So, if you're listening, think about your own day-to-day life and the unique architecture of your own mind. If our individual cognitive noise is completely unique to us, shaped by our specific memories, our distinct daily anxieties, our personal insecurities, and our highly curated self-image, then the ultimate practice for your body awareness might not resemble a traditional practice at all.
That's very true.
What if the perfect method for you isn't found in a yoga studio or on a meditation cushion? What if your specific entry point is actually hidden in a totally mundane, everyday activity?
Oh, wow.
It could be the repetitive motion of chopping vegetables. It could be the tactile focus of tending a garden, or just the rhythm of folding laundry.
Yeah.
It might simply be an activity where you naturally stop performing for the world, where the intense expectation to optimize finally drops away, and you inadvertently turn down the volume of that massive stadium stereo just enough to finally listen to the quiet signals of yourself.